I never thought my marriage would end like this, betrayed by the woman I loved, fighting for my daughter, and facing a man who was willing to destroy everything. But the night he showed up at my door with a baseball bat, that's when everything changed. In the dim glow of the ballroom, I stood in the shadows, watching as a couple moved effortlessly across the dance floor. Their eyes locked in an unspoken dialogue, every step they took in perfect harmony. The woman's chest rose and fell with each graceful motion, her partner pulling her closer than she had anticipated. Her slender frame contrasted strikingly against his broad, commanding presence, making them an almost hypnotic pair. Their movements were seamless, like a carefully rehearsed routine. He moved with the athleticism of a seasoned dancer, and she followed with practiced precision. The entire room seemed captivated, drawn in by the palpable energy between them. It wasn't necessarily love, but something powerful lingered in the air, something that surpassed mere friendship. Her honey blonde hair cascaded down her back in soft waves as she leaned toward him, not by choice but because he held her firmly in place. Her charming, confident boss. A sharp pang twisted in my chest, jealousy creeping in like an unwelcome guest. 11 years of marriage, and yet here I was, forced to witness my wife in another man's arms. Anger simmered beneath the surface, humiliation threatening to choke me. The annual awards and appreciation banquet at her company had become a tradition for us. Everyone in that room knew she was my wife. And yet, as I sat there, I could feel the weight of their stares, colleagues and onlookers waiting, anticipating some kind of reaction from me. Would I stand up? Would I confront them? After several dances, they finally left the floor, rejoining a table in the center of the hall with other colleagues. But I couldn't ignore what I had just seen. The way she looked at him, an intensity in her gaze that I recognized all too well. Once, that look had been reserved only for me. Now, it belonged to someone else. I hadn't seen them together like this in a long time, but the bitterness inside me was as fresh as ever. No matter how much I tried to suppress it, I knew the inevitable was coming. The tension coiled tighter and tighter, like a kettle on the verge of boiling over. I just needed to hold on a little longer. I tried in vain to steady myself, to balance the anger, the bitterness, and the gnawing fear of what was unfolding in front of me against the love, admiration, and trust one had once held for my wife. But no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't silence the war raging inside me. And when she walked away without so much as a glance in my direction, a crushing wave of despair settled over me. I lowered my head, feeling utterly defeated. I had done everything I could to mend what was broken between us. I had planned date nights, taken on household chores, tried to engage in meaningful conversations, and made countless romantic gestures, each attempt a desperate bid to reignite the spark we once had. But none of it had been enough. At the table, Harold chuckled, lifting his drink. The best part of these parties? Free alcohol. I managed a faint smile, nodding in agreement as I reached for my empty glass, mirroring Mary's movements. Me too, I muttered absent-mindedly. As the night stretched on, I couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. And then it hit me, Jason's wife. She was always a highlight of these gatherings, bringing warmth and elegance to our conversations. I glanced around before casually asking, "Has anyone seen Jason's wife tonight?" Mary, already a little loose from the drinks, leaned in slightly, her words slurring. "Oh, didn't Kelsey mention? Jason gave his wife the divorce papers." I stiffened, my fingers instinctively tightening around my glass. My eyes flickered across the room, avoiding direct contact, landing on nothing in particular. A stain on the tablecloth, an abstract pattern in the carpet, anything to mask the sudden turmoil her words had stirred. The atmosphere shifted. There was an unspoken understanding among those nearby, an air of discomfort as if they all knew something I didn't. Then, from across the table, a young man barely 25, smirked as he observed me. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange passing between us. His grin faltered, and he quickly turned his focus elsewhere, suddenly preoccupied with his own drink. The clock was ticking and soon the night came to an end. As our group dispersed, I followed Kelsey to the car. The ride home was quiet, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. But unlike me, Kelsey's mood hadn't darkened. Her face glowed with a beaming smile, completely unaffected by the night's events. When we arrived home, she immediately went to check on Caitlin, her daughter, while I focused on getting Brittany ready for bed before taking her home. By the time I returned, Kelsey had already fallen asleep. I paused by the doorway, watching her peaceful form before heading to check on Caitlin one last time. After that, I slipped into the bathroom, washed away the exhaustion of the evening, and then, without a word, retreated to the spare room for the night. I had already come to terms with the fact that intimacy between us was no longer an option. Today I divorce. Yesterday. Yesterday? The words echoed in my mind like a distant conversation I could barely grasp. Do you think Kelsey has already met with the lawyer? I asked. Bill shook his head. I don't think so, but I'll reach out to her and confirm. Let's meet in 30 minutes at the coffee shop. My assistant will have the notarized forms ready for you to sign. We'll file the paperwork Monday morning and serve her during lunch. Sounds like a solid plan. See you soon, I replied. I arrived at the coffee shop earlier than expected, offering the barista a faint smile as I placed my order. With my coffee in hand, I settled into a plush armchair near the fireplace. The warmth of the flames flickered across the pages of my thoughts, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape them. At first, I assumed Kelsey had been out to lunch or attending a meeting that day. But something about the date, March 5th, stood out. A recent memory tugged at the edges of my mind. Just the other day, I had been scrolling through old messages when I came across a conversation from that date. She had mentioned stopping by Mary's place after work to pick up clothes for Kate. It seemed harmless at the time. Mary's daughter was a little older, and we often received hand-me-downs from her. Normally, Mary would bring the clothes to work, but for some reason this time was different. I hadn't questioned it back then. But now it felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. My mind drifted elsewhere toward something more distant, my grandfather's legacy. He had been a man of great foresight, someone who understood the value of patience and long-term vision. He had sold parcels of land back to the community, ensuring its growth, and when he passed, I inherited the fruits of his wisdom. The family trust, initially funded with hundreds of thousands of dollars, had continued to grow untouched even after his death. Thanks to accrued interest, the balance remained stable, even increasing slightly over the years. My family's financial self-sufficiency meant I had never needed to withdraw a dime. And now, in the wake of my parents' passing, I had inherited everything they had owned as well. At the end of the week, I had a meeting scheduled to discuss possible options regarding the division of assets. One thing was certain. Our prenuptial agreement would provide a firm foundation for whatever legal battles lay ahead. I wasn't worried about my finances. That was one thing I had control over. Matt, one option is to hire a private investigator to get to the bottom of this and determine whether there's any real cause for concern, Bill suggested. I nodded, considering it. That makes sense. How soon could someone start? Bill frowned. Unfortunately, all of my usual investigators are tied up with other cases. It could take several weeks before they can take on yours. I let out a slow breath, frustrated but not surprised. I understand. But I don't want to wait that long. There might be another option, he offered. Do you want me to check if one of my contacts can start immediately? Yes, I said without hesitation. See if he's available today. Bill pulled out his phone. I'll reach out to him now and handle everything as the intermediary. I'll update you later today with any news. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Bill. After that, I spent the next hour filling out forms for my lawyer. Once the paperwork was complete, I had it submitted to my accountant, ensuring that all legal fees were deducted from a separate business account, one Kelsey had no access to. She had no idea what I was up to, and I intended to keep it that way. Later that evening, the truth hit me like a wrecking ball. Bill had gathered enough evidence to shatter any lingering hope I had left. Photographs, phone records, and even personal emails painted an eerie, undeniable picture of betrayal. There they were, captured together in intimate moments, looking every bit like a happy couple. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it with my own eyes. I sat in silence, staring at the damning evidence before me. A strange mix of emotions twisted inside me, anger at their audacity, admiration for the sheer cunning of their deception, and disgust at the ease with which they had lied to my face. And then Bill pressed play on a recording. Jason's voice came through, steady and confident. I want us to be together. Kelsey's reply was softer, almost hesitant. Do you really love me? His response was immediate, dripping with conviction. Yes, my dear. You are the epitome of perfection. Hearing him say those words to my wife, was like being gutted from the inside out. I had just lost everything. My wife. My partner. The mother of my child. And the worst part? The nightmare wasn't even over yet. I adore you, Kelsey murmured, her voice thick with longing. I dream of us becoming a real family, just you, me and Caitlin. Absolutely, Jason replied without hesitation. She paused for a moment before asking, and what do you think of Matt and Shannon? Jason scoffed. They're not like you, Kelsey. His tone was dismissive, almost condescending. Matt, for instance, he lacks ambition. He's comfortable being a hard-working man, but that's all he'll ever be. He builds someone else's wealth instead of chasing his own. A part of me twisted with anger at his words, but then Kelsey responded. Did you know he's the director of a factory that employs 400 people? His factory has the highest production and profit per square foot compared to others. I should have felt pleased that she was aware of my success, but the context drained any sense of satisfaction. Hearing them dissect my worth, as if I were nothing more than a footnote in their story, filled me with quiet rage. When will this happen? Kelsey asked. Jason's voice was confident, certain. We'll end our marriages at the same time. I need to take care of a few things before I officially file for divorce from Shannon. He sighed, almost as if this was an inconvenience rather than a life-altering decision. Given her psychiatric issues and the fact that our intimacy has been non-existent for the past year, I don't anticipate any major complications. She's unlikely to put up much of a fight. Kelsey was cautious. You have to start the process first. Shannon values stability. She won't risk her comfort unless she's absolutely sure about what comes next. I clenched my jaw. Kelsey knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't going to jeopardize her security for a fantasy unless Jason took the first step. Bill turned to me. Give it some thought, Matt. Let me know in a day or two what you'd like to do. That sounds good, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Would you like me to start drafting the document, laying out the framework so we can add details later? Or should I hold off until you give the final word? The lawyer asked. Let's go with the first option, I said. There was no point in waiting. Just then Larry, one of Bill's associates, approached and handed me his business card. Here's my personal number, Mr. Franks. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I took the card, forcing a polite nod. Please, just call me Matt. With that, the meeting was over, but my battle had only just begun. The idea of Kelsey moving on without me was a bitter pill to swallow. But what truly ate away at me was the thought of Jason, this arrogant, self-satisfied man, playing a role in my daughter's life. The mere image of him walking Caitlin down the aisle on her wedding day made my blood boil. My emotions were a tangled mess, and no amount of alcohol could bring me clarity. I had tried, drowning my anger and heartbreak in drinks, but by Sunday morning as I sat on the back porch nursing a pounding headache, the realization hit me with full force. Despite everything, I was going to lose my wife. I had fought it, resisted it, but deep down I knew there was no undoing this. Still, if she thought she could walk away from me without consequences, she was mistaken. Over the years, we had built a life together, accumulating assets and wealth that needed to be divided. Beyond that, I had already made up my mind. I would transfer $200,000 to Kelsey from my trust, not out of generosity, but as a calculated move. Perhaps knowing she wouldn't be left completely without financial security would soften her stance and make the legal proceedings smoother. But my priority wasn't her. It was Caitlin. I was determined to get primary custody, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. Maybe Larry, with his resources, could dig up something on Jason. Something that would call his character into question and prove he wasn't fit to be around my daughter. A man who had no issues sneaking around with a married woman couldn't possibly be a positive influence on her. And then there was Kelsey's company. I wanted to hold them accountable for allowing this to happen. Workplace affairs weren't just a betrayal of marriage, they were a corruption of professional ethics. The power imbalance between her and Jason, her immediate superior, made the entire situation even more inappropriate. I knew that suing the company might not result in any significant consequences, but that wasn't the point. This wasn't just about legal action. This was about making a statement. About making sure they understood that they had let something unacceptable take root under their watch. Matt, Bill cautioned, be prepared for high costs. A legal battle like this could be expensive. I exhaled slowly. I don't care, I said firmly. What angered me the most, what sent me spiraling into moments of despair, was that Kelsey was supposed to be my person. My partner. My wife. The life she was about to have with Jason. That was supposed to be mine. And even though I felt betrayed, even though my love for her had been tainted by resentment, the pain of losing her still cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I had always tried to be honest with Kelsey and treat her with the respect she deserved, even when it wasn't reciprocated. If nothing else, I found comfort in knowing that one day, Caitlin would see the truth for herself. She would understand the choices I had to make, the pain our family had endured, and why I had no other option but to protect what was left. For now, I was holding off on filing anything. I preferred to have everything in place before making my move. Give me an hour, Bill texted. That sounds good, I replied. I was already waiting in the parking lot when he arrived, sipping my coffee and finishing a small snack. As he sat across from me, I got straight to the point. I want to collect everything, every unpleasant file, photo, video, recording. We need to find a way to send all of it to Shannon Stanton. Maybe anonymously, through email. Larry leaned back, considering it. No problem. I know someone who works on the dark web, he said before ending the conversation abruptly. For a moment, I considered a more public approach. Maybe posting a video that would expose Jason for who he really was. Do you think that's a bad idea? I asked. Absolutely, Larry replied without hesitation. Bill brought up another angle. I've been looking into Jason's past. I need details, something we can use against him if this turns into a custody battle. I nodded, jotting down a few notes in my notebook. If Jason had any skeletons in his closet, we would find them. After we finished our coffee, the conversation shifted to Bill's career in law enforcement, reminiscing about mutual acquaintances and shared connections. Eventually, we shook hands and went our separate ways. That was 3 months ago. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of papers shuffling. I turned to the group, focusing on Larry. Can you find out who Shannon hired as her lawyer? I asked. If he's competent, tell Bill. If not, we'll find a way to contact Shannon directly and offer her some leverage. Larry nodded, sipping his coffee while Bill glanced between us. Can do, he said. Everything was falling into place. The only thing left was to wait for the right moment to strike. A lawyer might try to spin this against you, Bill remarked, setting down a folder. I nodded. I get it. But I'm willing to give her a week to find a place. I don't see anything wrong with that. Oh, you mean sharing the same house? Not just the house, I clarified. Technically, I'm the one in charge of both the house and Caitlin, at least according to the legal documents. Right? Yes, Bill confirmed. Until her lawyer files a motion to challenge it or until you both reach a mutual agreement. I hesitated for a second before saying, I meant that we're still sleeping in the same bed. Bill raised an eyebrow. That could send mixed signals. I sighed. I hadn't even thought about it that way. The weight of everything I had to handle on Monday was already overwhelming, and now this was one more thing lingering in the back of my mind. Despite my mood, Kelsey hadn't seemed to notice anything, though I hadn't expected her to. To make things easier, I called my aunt on Sunday and arranged for her to pick Caitlin up from school on Monday and keep her overnight. It would give me the space I needed to have a serious, uninterrupted conversation with Kelsey about what came next for our family. Thankfully, my aunt lived on a quiet farm outside the city, and Caitlin loved spending time there. The next day, I stopped by Bill's office unexpectedly and found Larry already inside. A stack of documents sat on the table, and the energy in the office was tense. Everyone was clearly working hard. Bill approached me, a thick set of papers in his hands. Matt, we officially filed with the court this morning. These are Kelsey's documents just as you requested. The process is moving forward. I exhaled, taking the envelopes from him. We've scheduled the formal serving of documents at your house for 9 a.m. on Tuesday. Does that work for you? I ran a hand through my hair before nodding. Yeah, that works. Later that evening, Kelsey picked up on my distracted state. Are you okay? She asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. It's nothing, I said casually. Just got a little caught up over the weekend. I need to catch up on things tonight. She didn't press further, and I was grateful for that. There was too much at stake now, and I needed to be prepared for whatever happened next. I've arranged for Aunt Alex to pick up Caitlin tonight. She'll be staying with her overnight, I said, keeping my voice even. Kelsey glanced up, surprised but simply nodded. I decided to shift the conversation to something neutral. I was thinking of cooking a homemade dinner tonight. Any preferences? That's really thoughtful of you, she replied. I'll be home on time. Dinner will be ready by 5:30, I said. Despite my calm demeanor, I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me, not guilt for what I was about to do, but for the situation itself. It shouldn't have come to this. When the time came, we sat down to eat, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken tension. I poured myself a glass of wine, took a slow sip, and finally spoke the words that had been circling in my mind for weeks. I'm filing for divorce. Kelsey froze, her fork hovering midair. She coughed slightly, swallowing hard before setting it down. Her eyes locked onto mine, blank at first, but I could see the gears turning. She was trying to process how I knew what I knew and, more importantly, what she was supposed to do next. Then realization hit. Her expression shifted, guarded now. "What kind of scam is this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "I met with my lawyer. The paperwork is already in motion. Jason has also filed for divorce from Shannon." I watched her closely. "I know about your feelings for him, Kelsey. I know you were planning to leave me." Her breath hitched. She stared at the table, her hands gripping the edge of her plate as if it were the only thing grounding her. For the first time she had nothing to say. "I understand, Kelsey," I continued, my voice quieter now. "I've known for a long time. I've had time to process it, to think about everything. And as much as this disappoints me, as much as it hurts," I paused, forcing down the lump in my throat. "I just need to know. Was there something I did? Did I push you toward Jason?" She flinched at the question, her immediate reaction a quick shake of her head. But then, as guilt seeped in, her gaze dropped, her posture retreating into itself. I let out a slow breath. "I'm willing to take a flexible approach when it comes to visitation," I said, shifting gears. "I'll continue providing insurance for Caitlin, but you'll need to secure your own coverage. As for finances, you can keep your own funds, any investments made during the marriage and the inheritance from your mother." The finality of it hung between us, unspoken but undeniable. There was no going back now. "I have no intention of taking anything that's rightfully yours," I said, keeping my tone measured. "All the investments we made together will be divided equally. Caitlin and I will stay in the house until it's sold." Kelsey remained silent, her expression unreadable. "I'm also contributing $200,000 from my trust as a goodwill gesture," I continued. "I want this transition to be as smooth as possible." Her face turned red as the conversation shifted toward Caitlin and Jason. It was the first real sign of emotion she had shown since we sat down. "He would never hurt her," she snapped. "And ultimately this decision is mine to make." Her words were sharp, almost threatening. "I'm not trying to remove you from her life," I said, keeping my composure. "But getting rid of her mother's influence isn't exactly a positive step in this process. No matter what, she will stay with me until we come up with another plan," she shot back. I exhaled, steadying my thoughts. "For now you can stay in the master bedroom for a few nights, or even a week, until we sort everything out." She said nothing, but I could tell she was processing everything. "My love for you, it's gone, Kelsey," I admitted. "But my respect for your role in Caitlin's life remains. I want to handle this as civilly as possible." I knew that avoiding a long, bitter custody battle was the best outcome for Caitlin, even if the thought of Jason being involved in her life made my stomach turn. "I have free time until the end of the week," I added, shifting the conversation forward. "Legally, you have to be served with the official papers, which will happen here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable at work, so maybe you should take a few days off." She nodded slightly, her mind elsewhere. "I know it'll be hard for both of us to be in the same house during this time," I admitted. "But I think we should meet with Caitlin tomorrow evening, or, if you prefer, she can stay home and we can work things out from there." There was no perfect solution, but I was determined to make this as painless as possible, for Caitlin's sake if nothing else. I called my aunt and let her know that we were handling some family matters, asking if she could keep Caitlin for an extra night and bring her back Wednesday morning. She kindly agreed. After that, I spoke to Caitlin. I told her she wouldn't be going to school the next day. She was a little confused but didn't argue. I reassured her that Kelsey and I would explain everything on Wednesday. Later that evening, while tidying up and getting ready for bed, I overheard Kelsey talking on the phone. Something about the conversation put me on edge. Just in case, I went to my gun safe, retrieved my .45 caliber pistol, checked that it was loaded, and set it on the chair next to me. Then I sat down to watch TV, trying to push aside the growing unease settling in my gut. A few hours later, while rinsing a glass at the kitchen sink, the unmistakable sound of tires screeching to a halt caught my attention. I turned just in time to see a sleek black BMW pull up in front of the house. Jason stepped out. He looked furious, and in his hands was a baseball bat. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I moved fast. I grabbed my phone from the chair and, keeping myself behind the locked door, quickly dialed 911. "My wife's boyfriend just pulled up to my house with a weapon," I reported, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Jason stormed toward the front door. His steps were heavy, deliberate, but when he got closer, I noticed something. His next movement was hesitant. He faltered, his foot catching on the step. That's when I fired the first shot. He stumbled. The second shot followed. Just as the third bullet left the barrel, I saw a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye near the door. I barely had time to process it when another shot rang out. This one wasn't mine. A bullet whizzed past, splintering into the already damaged front door. It missed Kelsey by mere inches. Jason collapsed, first onto his knees, then face-first onto the pavement. The deafening noise of gunfire still rang in my ears, mixed with the sound of Kelsey screaming. The chaos blurred together, but in the back of my mind, I knew exactly how things had escalated to this point. Jason had already lost everything. After his affair with Kelsey was exposed, both of them had been called into the vice president's office at their company. Unaware of the consequences awaiting them, they had confessed. The executives had made a swift decision. Jason, as the managing director, was fired for engaging in a relationship with a subordinate. My initial complaints against him had been dismissed, but in the end it didn't matter. Jason had lost his job, his reputation, his marriage, and now in his mind I was the one to blame. Jason had convinced himself that I was the reason for his downfall, that my complaints, my refusal to accept his actions, had somehow ruined his life. Fueled by anger and desperation, he had stormed into his office, grabbed a souvenir baseball bat, and decided to take matters into his own hands. But his rage had only led to tragedy. In the months that followed, everything slowly unraveled. Despite their passionate affair, Kelsey and Jason's relationship couldn't withstand the fallout. They kept in touch during the divorce process, but after it was finalized, she began to distance herself. Surprisingly, Kelsey didn't put up a fight in court. She didn't contest the divorce, nor did she hire a lawyer to challenge my custody claim. As a result, I was granted full custody of Caitlin without resistance. What did surprise me, however, was her complete refusal to fulfill her financial obligations. Bill had held on to her share of the assets for a while, hoping she would step up, but when it became clear that she had no intention of doing so, he returned it to me. She never came back to the house. Instead, she moved in with her family, and over time she faded from our lives entirely. After everything Caitlin and I had been through, rebuilding wasn't easy. The trauma lingered, haunting us in ways I hadn't anticipated. I sought therapy for 6 months, trying to process the anger, the betrayal, the loss. But in the end, I had to set my pain aside. I had a daughter to raise, a future to build. Caitlin, on the other hand, needed more time. She spent years in counseling, working through the scars left by the divorce and her mother's absence. There were nights she cried, asking questions I didn't have answers for, and moments where I wondered if she would ever fully heal. It took me 3 years to finally realize something. I was ready to move on.